Well, hey AP Biology, this is chapter 1. Hope you're doing well when you watch this video. Thank you for working so hard. Let's go ahead and get started. So, of course, chapter 1 is kind of like a, 15,000, 20,000 foot like overview of some of the things that we're going to be talking about this year. So, of course, this is some work based upon my classes, but nonetheless, go ahead and dive in and just kind of talk about a few things that we have when it comes to uh, all of this stuff. So basically, we have the ability to understand that biology is the study of life. And if you hear my children behind me, that's because they're trying to play together and they can't play together very well sometimes. And so there is great diversity among living organisms. So biology is a scientific study of life. And so, of course, living things have similar chemical components and all sorts of different things like that. And so here's the diversity of life. Very diverse, but also life does share some similarities. So is an apple alive? And we talked about that in class. So life generally has 7 properties. There's an order or organization to it. We have to be able to process energy. We, of course, adapt to our surroundings. We grow and develop. We respond to the environment. That'll be a huge one this year. Responding to the environment and like signaling cascades and like how do cells respond and differentiate and all that sort of stuff. Regulation and reproduction. And so here is just organization as far as life in the earth goes. Everything starts with an atom, and you can kind of summarize all the way through up here through an organism. But then, of course, yeah, we do dive into ecology. So a lot of times, teaching anatomy, we stop right here at the human body. But no, there's human populations. And so there's populations, and different populations make up a community and ecosystems and biospheres. And so we'll talk about that. What do you think? Do you think this is alive? And this is a virus, bacteriophage, infects bacterial species. And so go ahead and think about it, alive or not. And the answer is no. And why is it? Well, because viruses can't reproduce on their own. They can't do that. And so it's the thing that it's right on the verge, right? It does have genetic material. It is organized, but it can't reproduce on its own. And that's, of course, our not so dear friend who kind of wreaked havoc on the world. But that's what a scanning electron microscope generated image looks like of COVID. And so organization, yes, there's a lot to it. So there's a correlation between structure and function. If you want to watch this video or look up how hummingbirds and like the structure of their wing, and they can fly, hover in place and fly backward. I encourage you to watch some of those videos. It's crazy, but the anatomy, of course, the form allows the function. And so much like, living things, we have to be able to have a certain form and function. So this is also, living things also exist at many levels. There's an organization at cellular level, organismal level, and community level. And so living things require energy. Energy is the ability to do work. And so what that means is, we have to be able to maintain homeostasis, and metabolism is all the chemical reactions. I'm sure you've heard the phrase like, oh, she just or he just has a fast metabolism, but that's not really completely scientifically accurate. Like everybody has a very fast metabolism because that's all the chemical reaction in the body. Now, do people process foods differently and store fat differently? Yes, but that's not all the chemical reactions. And of course, sun is the ultimate source of energy. We'll dive into photosynthesis this year and how that works. If you were with me for 9th grade, you've already kind of come to, hopefully we'll remember some of that. It'll fire up some of those memories. Homeostasis is the maintenance of internal conditions. And so internal conditions are, it's very important to understand that we have to maintain a range within us to be able to have balance, and feedback systems help us do that. We'll talk about that down the road. Living systems respond to stimulus, right? Living things also reproduce and develop, and we have genes. Genes are our genetic information. You have like 3-point-something billion letters or information of DNA that makes you in so many ways, but DNA is not completely determinate. And so genes are composed of DNA, and we'll talk a lot about that this year. Adaptation is a modification that helps living things better able to function or survive and reproduce, right? And so adaptations allow us to do that. And so evolution is something is a big theme this year, and it's a change in populations over organisms over time. Notice it says populations. Populations evolve. And we'll talk about the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium and how allele frequencies change, and that leads to evolution. Evolution is great for showing how variation can happen within a kind. Not so great as far as origin story goes. And so there's a lot of big problems when it comes to how life came to be in the first place. But evolution is fantastic when it comes to how living things can change over time within a given population. Life shares common characteristics, which we talked about. Okay, so here's just a general kind of theme of biology. Again, the Earth was formed 4.6 to 4.5 billion years ago. I am a follower of Christ, and so the Bible talks about God creating the Earth. People debate if the Earth is young or old. Christians are on both sides. There's some Christians that even believe the story in Genesis is not to be read with a time image in mind, and so it's kind of interesting to see. But if this is the case, if the Earth is this old, and many Christians would believe that, then we came to be a long, like here's a 30-month time of each day represents 150 million years, and we're right at the very end. Like, my goodness, like humans come to be right at the very end. And so critical steps in evolution, nucleic acids, how do they form spontaneously, and so in order for life to exist, here's the thing: you have to have a code that comes up, and so nucleic acids give rise to like genetic information and DNA. Cell membrane arose. Well, without a cell membrane, why is this important? Well, without a cell membrane, there's no cell without a cell membrane, right? And by the way, how does a cell membrane with phospholipids gather around genetic information perfectly in a chaotic environment? There's a lot of faith that comes with this. Most lived in the ocean because there's no ozone layer, so radioactive UV light's coming in and destroying stuff. And it's pretty crazy to think about that. So photosynthesis evolved 2.7 billion years ago. And of course, with that, oxygen was a byproduct and began to change the environment. And so living things, there was a selective pressure, right? There was a selective pressure to enjoy oxygen. It's more efficient, which means it makes more ATP, technically, and our purposes, than anaerobic, which means without oxygen. Okay. Some cells evolve membrane enclosed compartments called organelles. Yes, organelles. We'll kind of review those this year. Mitochondria and powerhouse of the cell and the nucleus and all of that. And of course, those cells that have membrane-bound organelles are called eukaryotes. Prokaryotes do not have membrane-bound organelles. And so endosymbiosis, again, this is just, not diving into anything crazy in chapter 1, just kind of overviewing. But endosymbiosis, I would like for you to look that up and define it in your own words. That's a big theory about how living things came to be, especially organelles, specifically mitochondria and chloroplasts. Like, how did they come to be? Cellular specialization, which means your muscle cells look completely different than your nervous system cells. And why is that important? Because with specialization comes the ability to do different functions and specialize and leads to more complexity. Okay, so for evolution to take place, what must happen? Well, so many things must happen. Why don't you think about something, pause for a second and think about what exactly you're going to do here. I can change the size of this font, I think. Sweet. Well, first off, you have to gain information, and that information has to mean something important. Ooh, let's see if I can type. Mean something important, okay? Meaning like it encodes for a different, gene, protein, something that leads to an increase in fitness specific for the environment, okay? And so you have to add information, or the information has to change. And so natural selection is the theory, of course, proposed by our dear friend Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin said some aspects which are more able or apt to be passed on to the next generation. So favorable traits, of course, so these adaptations that increase an organism's chance of surviving and reproducing, increase the frequency of those traits. Why? Because they pass those traits on. And so in general, there's two statements in evolution. In general, I mean, it's kind of not the best way to think about it, but there's a struggle to survive, and the survival of the, what do you think? Fittest. Fittest? Yeah. And so mutations, of course, drive natural selection, because if we're all the same, nature can't select anything. So, for example, it's a picture from your book, I believe. Some plants exhibit variation in leaf structure, but these like hairy leaves, man, I'm not going to eat that, right? And so over time, this plant, adapts. Why? Because these hairy leaves right here, that organism doesn't want, the deer doesn't want to eat those hairy leaves. And so because of that, its chance of surviving and reproducing and passing those hairy traits on increase. So over time, the population has changed. And that is evolution. That, by definition, is evolution. Phylogenetic trees we'll talk about down the road. I'm not even going to discuss this right now, but basically this is how like all life is unified and all of that. I will not ask you any questions on phylogenetic trees until we cover that, because that's actually a hard thing where we have to build them from scratch and understand them from scratch. But that's kind of what they looks like. So basically like these two species would be more related than like this species and that species, because they have a closer sharing branching point. Can't get into that right now. Yeah, I don't want to do that to you. Taxonomy is the biology of naming things, and systematics is the relationships. And so, genus, what's that famous saying? King Philip came over for great spaghetti. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So species is the most, least inclusive. So you only have one species. Then in domain, you're talking about like millions and millions and millions of species. And so here's kind of what it looks like. So for us, Homo sapiens, yes, Eukarya is our domain, and then Amali, Chordata, which means we have notochord. Mammals, right? Primates, and then you kind of keep going from there. And so there's 3 domains in life. Archaea are these like special, really kind of unique prokaryotes that live in extreme places, or they have really interesting ribosomes and different DNA. And so prokaryotes, remember, lack a membrane-bound nucleus. Bacteria are unicellular prokaryotes that live in pretty much every environment on the planet. And Eukarya, of course, have membrane-bound organelles. And so here's Archaea. Extreme environments, chemosynthesized food, unique chemical characteristics that are not the same as bacteria. Here's bacteria. There's E. coli. Notice how it has like a rectangular rod shape. And then here is Eukarya. Sorry about all these like quick diag text things. And yeah, so like protists and fungi and plantae and animalia, all of that. And so binomial nomenclature, Latin base, Carolus Linnaeus, he kind of talked about, genus and species, and he was like writing everything. So examples of classification here: alligator, Mississippiensis, I think. You can see kingdom through species. LSU tigers, Panthera tigris, Homo sapiens. I went to USF, go Bulls. Bos indicus. I don't know why that O is like that. Bovidae. It's not funny. And of course, we go to the Mustang school, so there is their classification, okay? And yeah, biological systems are dynamic, which means they're characterized by rapid flows of matter and energy. Constantly, keyword here, constantly exchanging energy. Oh, that's bad. Don't do that. Don't cross it out. Exchanging energy, super important. And so with that being said, it's there's 2 different types of feedbacks that help us use energy wisely, not waste anything, but also maintain homeostasis. And so positive feedback is when we speed it up, like pedal to the metal. And I can't seem to get like a line that I like. Like that's a little too thick. Let's see this one. And this just slows down. I guess that's a little better. And so you can think about it. You can look them up, positive and negative feedback. Negative feedback, the prime premier example that every teacher uses is like temperature, right? If you're too cold, you start shivering. If you're too hot, you start sweating. But there's a lot more interesting, complicated ones than that that you can look up. But here's insulin, right? And so what happens is you have high blood glucose level. Let's just say you ate like 4 donuts because it's donut day or whatever. Insulin is released from cells in the pancreas, and then insulin has to travel through the body, and it allows glucose to be taken in by liver and muscle cells. And and there's obviously greatly simplifying this. But the problem is this is negative feedback. But what's important about insulin? Well, insulin lowers blood glucose levels, which is important. And of course, I'm sure you know someone, I know someone, family members and stuff, but diabetics don't either make insulin or don't respond to it anymore because their system's been stressed too much. And you can either be born with diabetes or acquire it through living. And so this is an example of feedback mechanism, right? Too high blood sugar levels, we gotta lower it, we gotta negate it, go back to the original. And so there's that. Positive feedback, I don't give you an example of that, but positive would be like childbirth, like speed up, speed up, speed up, we need this baby to get out. Where does information come from? Information comes from DNA. So here's just a journal. This is called, let me just introduce you to that really quick. And this will be important down the road. Again, these are all kind of highlights of features that we're going to be seeing in different units. Again, we're just kind of taking a brief overview of where it is. But this is called a central dogma, which means, oh, no, I still can't type, which means DNA goes to RNA, goes to protein. And this is like the central thesis of biology. This is the foundation of so much in the world of biology. And so we all have different genes, therefore we make different proteins, therefore we have different characteristics, and we survive at differential rates based upon our genetics. And so therefore if a mutation happens, something could be good that gives us an advantage, and something could negate that advantage and be detrimental. Okay, so DNA is like letters of an alphabet. The three same letters give you rat, tar, and art. Completely different things, completely different nouns, completely different meanings. But DNA, and that's how it is. Like A, T, C's, and G's can give completely different genes. Okay, I mean, here's a picture from a textbook, and I'm sorry it's kind of pixelated, but you have the crystalline gene, which allows light to literally enter through your lens cells, and so the lens like literally focuses light onto the retina. And crystalline is made of a certain gene, which makes mRNA, which makes a protein. That protein is structured in a certain way, very spaced out to let light through. And that protein's not, this DNA is not read and transcribed and expressed in different places in your body, only in your eyes. And so how does that happen? It's fascinating. And we'll dive into some of that today. Here's a central dogma again, DNA to RNA to protein. And so evolution is a change in genetic makeup. Talked about a little bit, but it's a core theme. And so wanted to see a little bit more about that before I let you go for chapter 1. But evolution is a change in genetic makeup. The genes have to change in order for evolution to occur. And so natural selection adaptations. So you can see right here, these frogs are adapted for different environments, right? Walking, aquatic, glides from tree to tree. Trust fall right there. Climbing, toe pads, multiple contact points. And so evolutionary theory is definitely supported by tons and tons of evidence. Way more evidence, of course, from change within kinds than origin stories, but nonetheless. And so here is the scientific method. The scientific method, of course, is revised. I mean, it's not just a complete linear process. You can go back and change stuff, and we'll be doing a lot of science this year. And so here's what I want you to kind of think about. Data tells a story. Okay. Data tells a story. And so what story is being shared here? I'll let you kind of do this on your own. Y and X. Okay. We'll talk about it in class. What do you think this story is being shared? And then also, I want you to do this on your own. Read through this investigation and answer these questions. Okay? Both of these. And so again, this is practicing science. So I'll go ahead and pause here. You can pause here and answer these questions in the note packet. And then you can also pause here and answer these questions in the note packet. Okay? So there's chapter 1, guys. I hope this was helpful. Super proud of you. Proud of you for taking a hard course. Hope you have a blessed day. God bless.